Whispers and revelations the moment Catherine and Dominic entered the grand hall together. A ripple of hushed conversation spread across the room. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, the sudden shift of attention like a physical pressure against her skin. Dominic's hand remained steady at her elbow, his posture relaxed, despite being the center of attention. "Breathe," he murmured, just loudly enough for her to hear. "They're more intimidated by you than you are by them."
How bad?
"Seems unlikely," Catherine whispered back, forcing a smile as Simone approached, eyebrows raised in silent question. "Dominic, I see you've met our textile conservation genius," Simone said, her eyes darting between them with undisguised curiosity. "Indeed, Catherine has been giving me a preview of the exhibition." "Her knowledge is remarkable," Dominic replied, his tone warm but professional. "In fact, I'm considering a special addition to our funding arrangement." Simone's eyes widened. "Oh, love to hear more, of course. Perhaps we could discuss it over dinner next week. I have some ideas about expanding the Conservation Department's public engagement opportunities." As they spoke, Catherine noticed Jasmine Spencer hovering nearby, clearly trying to insert herself into the conversation. The women who had mocked her earlier were watching from a distance, their expressions a mixture of confusion and calculation. "Mr. Hargrove," Jasmine finally interjected, "the photographer from Boston Arts Monthly would love a few pictures of you with the board members. It would be wonderful publicity for the foundation." Certainly, Dominic agreed smoothly. "But first, I'd like Catherine to join me for a conversation with Professor Bennett about his textile research in Peru. Expertise would be invaluable." Before Jasmine could respond, Dominic guided Catherine toward an elderly gentleman in the corner of the room, leaving Jasmine with her mouth slightly agape. "You don't actually need my input on Peruvian textiles, do you?" Catherine asked, once they were out of earshot. The corner of Dominic's mouth lifted. "Professor Bennett is an old friend who owes me a favor. I'll happily discuss Peruvian weaving techniques for hours if it helps us avoid unwanted conversations." The next hour passed in a blur as Catherine found herself introduced to scholars, artists, and philanthropists who actually seemed interested in her work. With Dominic beside her, doors that had previously been closed suddenly opened. People who had ignored her earlier now listened attentively as she spoke about conservation challenges and historical textile techniques. During a brief moment alone by the refreshment table, Simone cornered Catherine, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Whatever spell you've cast on Dominic Hargrove, keep it going," she whispered. "He's never shown this much interest in any of our projects before." Catherine frowned. "I haven't cast any spell. We just talked about the collection." "Darling, Dominic Hargrove doesn't just talk to anyone. The man declined dinner with the governor last month, and here he is, practically glued to your side all evening." Before Catherine could respond, a tall woman with elegant silver hair approached them. "Dr. Richardson, might I borrow Ms. Walsh?" For a moment, Simone practically pushed Catherine forward. "Of course, Mrs. Hargrove." Catherine's stomach dropped. "Dominic's mother." She followed the woman to a quieter corner of the room, bracing herself for a polite but firm warning about getting too close to her son. "I'm Eleanor Hargrove," the woman said once they were alone. "Dominic's aunt, not his mother, as most people assume. He's mentioned your work several times on the phone this past week." Catherine blinked in surprise. "He has? But we only just met tonight." Eleanor smiled, the expression softening her aristocratic features. "He visited the conservation lab last Tuesday while you were at lunch. Apparently he was quite impressed with your restoration notes on the 1940s wedding gown collection." "Saw my notes?" Catherine's mind raced. The wedding gown collection was a personal project, one she'd been working on independently. The pieces had belonged to local women during World War II, many made from parachute silk or repurposed formal wear due to rationing. Indeed, did you know his grandmother's wedding dress is part of that collection? It's a blue silk with a modified sweetheart neckline. Catherine's eyes widened. "The Hargrove Patterson gown? That's one of the centerpieces of the exhibition. The bride used silk from her brother's pilot scarf in the seams, her something blue that couldn't be seen. For luck while he was flying missions," Eleanor nodded. "That brother was Dominic's great-uncle Philip." The family history isn't widely known, but Dominic has always been fascinated by it when he saw your restoration work and your notes about the personal stories behind each gown. Understanding dawned on Catherine. That's why he funded the textile wing renovation, partly, Eleanor acknowledged, though I suspect his interest has found a new focus. Her gaze drifted across the room to where Dominic was speaking with Professor Bennett, his tall frame easy to spot in the crowd, as if sensing their attention. Dominic looked up, his eyes finding Catherine immediately. He excused himself from the professor and began making his way toward them. "Just one piece of advice," Eleanor said quickly. "My nephew values authenticity above all else. It's rare in his world, and clearly in yours too. So don't let the whispers. Change how you see yourself." She squeezed Catherine's hand gently before turning to greet her approaching nephew. "Aunt Eleanor, I see you've met Catherine," Dominic said, his expression warm but cautious, as if worried about what his aunt might have revealed. "Indeed, we were just discussing the Patterson wedding gown and its historical significance," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Ms. Walsh's knowledge is impressive." As they continued talking, Catherine noticed Jasmine and her friends watching them, their earlier mockery replaced by calculated interest. The whispers had changed tenor, but they hadn't stopped. Now, instead of dismissing her, they were trying to understand what Dominic Hargrove saw in the quiet conservator that they had missed. Catherine wasn't sure which felt more uncomfortable, being invisible, or being suddenly, intensely visible. For reasons that had little to do with her actual work and everything to do with Dominic's unexpected attention. The unexpected champion, the exhibition hall, was dimly lit, a stark contrast to the brilliant chandeliers of the main gala. Catherine breathed easier here, among the glass cases holding fragments of history she'd painstakingly preserved. Traced the air above a display of 1920s beaded evening bags, not touching, but following the intricate patterns as if reading Braille. "You speak about them as if they're alive," came a deep voice from behind. Catherine startled, turning to find a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit watching her with curious eyes. Unlike the dismissive glances from the gala attendees, his gaze held genuine interest. "Mr. Hargrove," she gasped, recognizing the Foundation's notoriously private benefactor from the few photographs that existed of him. Dominic Hargrove was known for his architectural brilliance, vast fortune, and complete disinterest in social climbing. "I'm sorry. This area isn't officially open yet. Please don't apologize." His voice was warm, with unexpected gentleness for someone who commanded such power. "I came to escape the performance out there, same as you, and call me Dominic." Catherine shifted uncomfortably. "I should return to the gala. Dr. Richardson will wonder where I've gone." "Before you do," Dominic said, stepping closer to examine the display case, "would you tell me about this piece? The craftsmanship is extraordinary." Something in his sincere interest made Catherine pause. "It's a ceremonial evening purse from 1925. See how the beads create this sunburst pattern? Each one was hand-sewn, probably taking weeks to complete. And this would have been carried by a woman attending an event much like the one happening right now." Catherine smiled faintly. "Though I imagine she'd have had more meaningful conversations than discussions about whose dress costs more." Dominic's laugh was unexpected, a rich sound that seemed to fill the quiet space. "Precisely why I find these events exhausting." Though occasionally his eyes met hers, they yield surprising encounters. They continued through the exhibition, Catherine pointing out details only a trained eye would notice: a clever mending technique, an innovative use of materials during wartime rationing, the signature style of a forgotten designer. Dominic asked thoughtful questions that revealed his own knowledge of historical contexts, surprising her with his depth. "So you're the curator behind this renovation," he said finally. "When Simone proposed this project, I was intrigued. But seeing your passion for these pieces, now I understand their true value." "I'm just the conservator," Catherine corrected. "Dr. Richardson is the curator. The difference being, she decides what stories to tell. I make sure the physical objects survive to tell them." Dominic considered this. "Both essential roles, though I suspect you understand these pieces better than anyone." The sound of approaching voices interrupted their conversation. Spencer appeared with a cluster of board members, and the same women who had mocked Catherine earlier. "There you are, Mr. Hargrove. Everyone's been looking for you," Jasmine trilled, then noticed Catherine with apparent surprise. "Oh, and Catherine, giving an impromptu tour." The taller woman from before smiled thinly. "How resourceful of you to corner our benefactor, dear." Catherine felt her face flush. "I was just receiving a private consultation," Dominic interrupted. "Smoothly, Miss Walsh has been educating me on textile conservation techniques. Fascinating field requires exceptional patience, knowledge, and skill." His tone was casual, but carried unmistakable authority. "In fact, I've decided to increase the Foundation's grant specifically for the conservation department." Jasmine's mouth opened slightly, while the other women exchanged glances. "Catherine, would you join me for a moment?" Dominic gestured toward the main hall. "I'd like to discuss some aspects of the collection with the other guests." Before she could respond, he gently placed his hand at the small of her back, guiding her past the stunned group and back toward the gala. As they walked, he leaned down slightly. "I apologize for the theatrics, but I've found that certain people only understand value when it comes with a price tag attached." Catherine felt a surprising bubble of laughter rise in her throat. "You didn't have to do that, actually. I did. Not just for you." His expression grew serious. "People who mock dedication and craftsmanship are exactly why places like this museum matter. They've forgotten what's real." They paused at the entrance to the grand hall, the glittering crowd just beyond. "Ready?" he asked. Catherine took a deep breath, suddenly aware that every eye would turn to them when they entered. Not really. Dominic smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "Good. Neither am I. Let's remind them what authenticity looks like." And with that, he offered her his arm and led her into the light, the whispers already beginning as Boston's. Elite wondered who had captured the attention of the elusive Dominic Hargrove. Overlooked eleganza, Theron Walsh ran her fingers over the delicate beadwork of the 1930s evening gown, expecting each tiny glass bead for signs of deterioration. The Textile Conservation Lab at the Westfield Historical Museum was her sanctuary quiet, methodical and predictably like the charity gala she'd been pressured into attending tonight. "You've been hiding in this basement for 3 years, Dr. Simone Richardson," the museum's curator and Catherine's mentor had insisted. "The Hargrove Foundation is funding our entire textile wing renovation. The least you can do is make an appearance at their benefit." Catherine sighed, carefully placing the vintage garment back in its acid-free box. Her work reviving historical textiles brought her joy, but the thought of mingling with Boston's elite made her palms sweat. Still, she couldn't disappoint Simone. That evening, Catherine stood before her mirror, adjusting the simple black dress she'd rescued from a vintage shop years ago. Its elegant lines and subtle hand embroidery spoke to a craftsmanship rarely seen in modern clothing. As a textile conservator, she appreciated its historical value more than any trendy designer piece she couldn't afford anyway. The Westfield Museum's marble grand hall had been transformed for the evening. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the space, while waiters in crisp uniforms offered champagne to guests in couture ensembles that probably cost more than Catherine's annual salary. "Catherine, you made it," Simone waved from across the room, resplendent in an emerald gown. "Come, there are people you should meet." Catherine navigated through clusters of guests, acutely aware of the evaluating glances sliding over her modest attire. She caught fragments of whispered comments. "Is that vintage or just old? Darling, did she mistake this for a history lecture?" A woman in a red designer dress turned to her companion. "I thought this was an exclusive event, apparently. They're letting in the help now." Catherine's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin and continued forward. She knew her worth wasn't measured in designer labels. Simone introduced her to several board members, who politely nodded before quickly finding reasons to drift away. Left alone at the edge of the crowd, Catherine found herself studying the architectural details of the ceiling, anything to appear occupied. "Excuse me," a cultured voice cut through Catherine's thoughts. Jasmine Spencer, the museum's marketing director, stood before her with 2 impeccably dressed women. These ladies were curious about the upcoming textile exhibition. "Since you're "Oh, you are expert," she said, the slight pause making the title sound more like an accusation than a credential. "Of course," Catherine smiled, grateful to discuss her passion. "We'll be featuring a collection of garments showing the evolution of women's evening wear. From 1890 to 1950, many pieces have never been displayed before." The taller woman assessed Catherine's dress with thinly veiled disdain. "How quaint. Suppose you're taking your research rather personally." They laughed, not bothering to hide their mockery. "Actually," Catherine replied evenly, "historical textiles tell us stories about craftsmanship, cultural values, and human ingenuity that we've largely forgotten. Each stitch represents hours of skilled labor we rarely see today." Their eyes glazed. Over and within moments, they'd made excuses and moved on. Catherine's shoulders slumped as she watched them, rejoined the glittering crowd. She slipped away toward the exhibition hall, where she'd spent countless hours preparing artifacts for the renovation. At least there, surrounded by the handiwork of generations past, she felt understood. Unlike in that room of people who valued labels over legacy and price tags over provenance, she didn't notice the tall figure watching her exit, or the thoughtful expression on his face as he set down his untouched champagne and followed. Beyond appearances, the gala was winding down, with only a few dozen guests remaining, when Dominic leaned close to Catherine's ear. "Would you like to see something remarkable?" His question, spoken softly amid the dwindling crowd, sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. She had spent the evening in a strange limbo, partly exhilarated by meaningful conversations about her work, partly unsettled by the calculating looks from people who had dismissed her hours earlier. "Depends on what you consider remarkable," she replied with newfound boldness. Dominic's smile reached his eyes. "The original architectural plans for this building. They're rarely shown to anyone." Minutes later, they were ascending a narrow staircase hidden behind an unassuming door marked "Staff Only." Dominic produced a key that Catherine hadn't seen any other board member use. "The perks of funding the East Wing renovation," he explained. Catching her questioning look, "The museum director thought I might appreciate access to the archives." The archives were housed in what was once an attic, now transformed into a climate-controlled repository of historical documents. Dominic navigated the space with surprising familiarity, leading her to a large table where an architectural drawing was already laid out. "You planned this," Catherine observed, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "I hoped," he corrected, switching on the specialized archival lighting. "There's a difference." The blueprints revealed the museum as it had been originally conceived in 1897 grandeur, tempered by practical considerations. Beauty married to function. Catherine leaned over the detailed drawings, admiring the precision. "Your field and mine aren't so different," Dominic said, carefully unrolling another set of plans beside the first. "We both preserve history while creating space for new stories, except your work shapes how people live. Mine just reminds them how people once lived." "You underestimate the power of memory," he countered. "The past isn't dead, it's embedded in everything we build upon." They lost track of time discussing the evolution of the museum building, the way each generation had modified the space while respecting its original vision. Catherine found herself sharing theories about how architectural changes had influenced fashion trends throughout history, ideas she'd rarely voiced to anyone else. The raised hemlines of the 1920s weren't just about liberation, she explained, animated in a way she seldom allowed herself to be. They were also practical responses to new architectural spaces, department stores, with escalators, office buildings, with revolving doors, fashion adapted to movement through modern structures. Dominic listened intently, occasionally challenging her theories with historical counterpoints that revealed his own extensive knowledge. Their conversation flowed naturally between their respective disciplines, each finding unexpected connections to the other's expertise. "You never answered my question," Dominic said later, as they stood looking out the small, arched window overlooking the now empty museum grounds. "About why you hide your passion when you're around people like those at the gala." Catherine tensed. "I don't hide it. They're just not interested." "Some aren't," he acknowledged. "But you didn't even give the others a chance. You assumed rejection before it happened." "With good reason," she countered, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "I've spent years watching people's eyes glaze over when I talk about textile. Conservation. After a while, you learn to keep your enthusiasm to yourself. Or you find people who share it, Dominic suggested quietly. The implication hung between them, both exhilarating and terrifying. Catherine turned away from the window. Why did you really invite me up here, Mr. Hargrove? Dominic, he corrected automatically, and I thought that was obvious. I enjoy your company, because I know about your grandmother's wedding dress. Because I'm some refreshing novelty compared to your usual social circle. His expression shifted, a hint of hurt flashing across his features before his composure returned. Is it so difficult to believe I simply value your perspective? In my experience, people like you don't seek out people like me unless they want something. People like me? His voice cooled. You mean wealthy? I mean people who can move through the world without having to prove their worth at every turn.
Dominic
Was silent for a long moment. You're right. I have privileges you don't. But you're wrong if you think that means I don't have to fight to be seen for who I am rather than what I represent. The truth of his words settled uncomfortably between them. Catherine had been so focused on the barriers she faced that she hadn't considered he might have his own. Your aunt said you visited the lab last week, she said finally. Why didn't you introduce yourself then? Because I wanted to see the work without the performance. It's the real passion, not the presentation version. He paused. The same reason. You came to the exhibition hall tonight instead of staying at the gala. Catherine considered this. So we're both hiding in our own ways, he corrected gently. Past tense. Their eyes met, and Catherine felt something shift. Recognition. Of shared understanding that transcended their different backgrounds. Before either could speak again, a text alert sounded from Dominic's phone. Security, he explained after checking the message. They're doing final rounds. We should head back. As they descended the stairs, the spell of their private conversation began to dissolve. The real world waited below with all its judgments and expectations. Catherine felt the familiar anxiety returning, knowing that tomorrow the whispers would continue, perhaps even intensify after tonight. Catherine Dominic said as they reached the main floor, seeming to sense her withdrawal. Would you consider showing me more of your conservation work tomorrow? Without the gala audience? The invitation hung between them, simple on the surface, but layered with implications. Catherine hesitated, torn between the genuine connection they'd formed and her lingering suspicion of his motives. I don't need a patron, she said finally, or someone to champion my work out of charity. Dominic's expression hardened slightly. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what this is, she admitted. I'm not sure you do either. She extended her hand formally, a deliberate step back from the intimacy they'd shared moments ago. Thank you for your interest in the textile collection, Mr. Hargrove. The museum appreciates your support. Dominic looked at her outstretched hand, then back to her face, his eyes searching hers. After a moment, he accepted the handshake with the same formality she had offered. The pleasure was mine, Ms. Walsh, he replied, his voice revealing nothing. Of his thoughts? I look forward to seeing the completed exhibition. Catherine turned and walked away, her vintage dress moving softly around her legs as she headed toward the exit. She didn't look back to see Dominic watching her leave. His expression, a complex mixture of respect, disappointment, and resolve. Woven together 3 weeks after the gala, the Westfield Museum hummed with anticipation. The textile wing renovation was complete, and tonight's exhibition opening would showcase Catherine's conservation work to the public for the first time. She moved methodically through the displays, making final adjustments to the lighting that highlighted each piece's unique characteristics. Everything looks perfect, Simone assured her, appearing at Catherine's side. You've created something extraordinary here. Catherine smiled faintly, running her fingers over the information card beside the Hargrove Patterson wedding gown. She had expanded its description to include the full story of the bride's brother and his wartime. Servicedale she'd researched extensively after her conversation with Eleanor Hargrove. Have you heard from him? Simone asked, following Catherine's gaze to the blue silk gown. Oh, Catherine replied simply. She had rehearsed this answer over the past weeks, as colleagues repeatedly inquired about Dominic's noticeable absence from the museum since the gala. The truth was more complicated. Eleanor had visited twice, bringing additional family photographs. in letters to enrich the exhibition's historical context. During her second visit, she had casually mentioned that Dominic was overseeing a restoration project in Chicago information Catherine had absorbed with practiced neutrality while ignoring the hollow feeling it created. "He'll be here tonight," Simone said, checking her clipboard. "His office confirmed yesterday." Catherine nodded, keeping her expression neutral as she moved to adjust the placement of a beaded flapper dress. She had replayed their last conversation countless times, wondering if she had misjudged his intentions or if he had merely lost interest. Once the challenge of her resistance became apparent. Hours later, Catherine stood in the background as guests. Filtered into the exhibition, she had chosen another vintage piece for the evening, 1940s. Burgundy dress with subtle details that a discerning eye might appreciate. Unlike the gala, tonight she felt centered in her expertise, regardless of who might or might not notice her. The exhibition was drawing genuine interest. Visitors lingered at displays, reading the stories Catherine had painstakingly researched about each garment's original owner. The wedding gown collection, arranged chronologically to show the evolution of styles through periods of prosperity and hardship, had drawn a constant crowd. "You've made them come alive," came a familiar voice. Catherine turned to find Dominic standing behind her, dressed more casually than at the gala but still impeccably tailored. His eyes held the same intensity she remembered, but there was caution there too. "That was the goal," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "To show the people behind the clothing, not just the fashion." "You've succeeded," he gestured toward a group of elderly visitors examining a display of 1950s cocktail dresses. "I overheard that woman telling her granddaughter about owning a similar dress, the memories it brought back for her." An awkward silence fell between them. Catherine was acutely aware of Jasmine Spencer watching them from across the room, no doubt cataloging this interaction for later gossip. "Chicago was interesting," Dominic said finally. "Textile mill being converted to affordable artist housing. The original looms are being preserved as part of the common spaces." Catherine couldn't help her spark of interest. "The Hartwell Mill? I read about that project. I thought you might have." His smile was tentative. "I brought back something I thought you'd appreciate." From his jacket pocket, he produced a small fabric sample encased in archival quality protection. Catherine accepted it carefully, examining the intricate weave through the clear preservation material. Original upholstery from the mill owners. "Office, circa 1890, Dominic explained. "They found several pieces during demolition. The gesture was thoughtful, professional, yet personal, respecting her expertise while acknowledging their shared appreciation for historical craftsmanship. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "It's fascinating." Another silence, less awkward, but charged with unspoken words. "Catherine," Dominic began, then hesitated. "I've been thinking about what you said about not needing a patron or a champion." She waited, sensing he had more to say. "You were right," he continued. "You don't need either. Your work speaks eloquently for itself." He gestured around the exhibition. "But I think we both made assumptions that night. You about my intentions and me about your reservations. And what were your intentions?" Catherine asked quietly. "To know someone who sees beyond surfaces," he replied simply. "I spent that evening watching you bring history to life with your words, showing the humanity behind each artifact. It's rare to meet someone who looks that deeply." Catherine considered his words. "And my reservations were justified," he acknowledged. "Our worlds are different, or perhaps not as incompatible as they seemed that night." Before Catherine could respond, Eleanor Hargrove approached them, accompanied by an elderly man Catherine didn't recognize. "Catherine, dear, the exhibition is magnificent," Eleanor said warmly. "I've brought someone special to see it. This is Philip Hargrove." Catherine's eyes widened. "Your great-uncle, the pilot." The elderly man smiled, his eyes remarkably similar to Dominic's scrinkling at the corners. "The very same. When Eleanor told me about the blue silk in Marianne's wedding dress, I had to see it for myself. Didn't think anyone would remember that small detail after all these years." "Catherine remembers everything," Dominic said quietly, his gaze never leaving her face. "It's her gift." Philip took Catherine's hand in his weathered one. "Would you show me the dress, my dear? I'd like to hear its story from the person who cared enough to preserve it." The request was simple, but profound in acknowledgement of Catherine's role as not just a conservator of objects, but a keeper of memories. She led Philip toward the wedding gown display, aware of Dominic and Eleanor following behind, as Catherine described the conservation process and the historical context of wartime weddings. A small crowd gathered around them. Among them were some of the same people who had dismissed her at the gala, now listening attentively as she spoke. Jasmine Spencer hovered at the edges, her expression a mixture of surprise and reluctant respect. Philip listened intently, occasionally adding personal anecdotes that brought laughter from the gathered guests. When Catherine finished, he turned to address the crowd. "My niece's dress isn't just fabric and thread," he said, his voice strong despite his age. "It's a testament to hope during dark times. This young lady," he nodded toward Catherine, "understands that preserving these garments means preserving our stories, our humanity." The crowd murmured appreciation, and Catherine felt a flush of pride that had nothing to do with validation from Boston's elite and everything to do with the genuine connection to history she had helped facilitate. As the evening continued, Catherine found herself repeatedly sought out by guests, asking thoughtful questions about the exhibition. She noticed Dominic keeping a respectful distance, watching her shine in her element without interruption. Later, as the crowd thinned, he approached her again. "Walk with me," he asked, gesturing toward the museum gardens that had been opened. For the event, outside, the spring evening was cool and clear, fairy lights illuminating the garden paths. They walked in comfortable silence until reaching a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. "I owe you an apology," Catherine said as they sat. "I was defensive that night. I assumed your interest was either professional courtesy or romantic pursuit," Dominic suggested when she trailed off. Catherine nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips, which seemed equally unlikely. "Why?" The question was gentle but direct. "Because people who move between our worlds usually want something: funding, connections, publicity. I couldn't understand what you might want from me." Dominic considered this, perhaps something neither of us recognized at first. "Authenticity is rare in both our worlds, Catherine. You have it in abundance. So do you," she countered, "when you're not playing the role of the untouchable benefactor." He laughed softly. It's a fair observation. A comfortable silence settled between them, the distant sounds of the exhibition reception carrying through the garden. "I'm leaving for Paris next week," Dominic said finally. "The foundation is funding the restoration of a historical textile workshop in Montmartre. The original looms are still intact." Catherine's eyes widened with interest. "They need a conservation consultant," he continued. "Someone who understands both the mechanical requirements and the historical significance." "That sounds fascinating," Catherine said sincerely. "It would be," Dominic agreed, "especially with the right expertise." He turned to face her directly. "This isn't patronage or championing, Catherine. It's recognition of exceptional skill. The position is yours if you want it, completely separate from ... double quotes. He gestured between them. "Whatever this might be." "And what might this be?" she asked softly. "A beginning," he suggested. "Two people with different backgrounds but similar values, seeing where that leads." His expression grew serious. "No expectations beyond honest conversation and mutual respect." Catherine considered his words, recognizing the careful boundaries he was establishing. Not a fairy tale romance or a professional transaction, but something more nuanced. Genuine connection with room to grow naturally. "I'd like to see them on Montmartre workshop," she said finally. "Professionally speaking." Dominic nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "And personally speaking," Catherine smiled, feeling the last of her defenses soften. "I'd like to continue our conversation about the intersection of architecture and fashion, perhaps over dinner in Paris." His answering smile was warm and genuine. "I'd like that too." As they walked back toward the museum, Catherine noticed Jasmine watching them through the windows, her expression speculative. This time, Catherine didn't feel the sting of judgment or the weight of scrutiny. The whispers no longer mattered, not because she had gained approval through association with Dominic, but because she had found confidence in her own worth, reflected in the eyes of someone who truly saw her inside. Philip Hargrove was still examining the wedding gown, his weathered hand hovering over the display case. "You know," he said as Catherine and Dominic approached, "Marianne always said that blue silk carried luck with it. Said it brought her back things she thought were lost." His eyes twinkled as he glanced between them. "Seems there might be something to that after all." Catherine exchanged a smile with Dominic, feeling the threads of possibility weaving between them. Two people from different worlds finding unexpected common ground in their appreciation for craftsmanship, history, and the authentic stories that transcend time.